Hello there, welcome to Cansanity. Today we're making dill pickles, one of our favorite pickles. Now, I like to make a dill pickle that is made with a low amount of salt. There's all kinds of dill pickle recipes out there, and my favorite recipe is one that has only 3 cups of vinegar and 10 cups of water, that's the liquid in the brine, and only a half a cup of kosher salt. Now you could use kosher salt or pickling salt, but that's the brine that I like to use for my dill pickles. That's most of my dill pickles I make with this combination. Now the other ingredients are simple ingredients: garlic, dill heads, and I like to use I like to put 2 grape leaves in each of my jars because they have tannins in them that help keep the pickles crisp. And I grow grapes in my garden, so it's easy for me to just go and snip a couple for each jar. You can also put oak leaves. Oak leaves will work the same, but I always use grape leaves. So now we're going to move on to talk about how you prep your cucumbers. Okay, next we're going to talk about prepping your cucumbers. Now, all of my cucumbers have been washed and scrubbed, and so what we like to do is we use a brush and we scrub off all the spines and make sure that the cucumbers are nice and clean. Now, I grow pickling cucumbers at the side of my house, and so I've been getting every day about 3-inch pickles, or cucumbers, and so I've done a couple jars, single jars. I've done 3-quart jars already. And this is the ideal size, in my opinion, for making dill pickles. And that's 3 inches, 3 to 4 inches. Now, I've been making them, so I didn't have a lot on my plant. So I went out yesterday to the farmer's market and I picked up some cucumbers so that I could show you this video, or do this video. And now, I went a little late and all I could find was bigger cucumbers. So I sorted them out. And the real big ones I'm saving for a different type of pickle there, and I sorted out the smaller ones. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the larger cucumbers on the bottom of my jar, and then I'm going to fill the top with the smaller pickles. Now the reason why I like to use 3 to 4 inch size cucumbers for making my pickles is that I can cram in a lot of cucumbers into these jars, and that is, if it's packed tightly, it's more likely to seal better for you. So that's been my experience anyways. And I do a couple jars where I slice my cucumbers, and certainly could make pickles with those big cucumbers and slice them, but I like my cucumbers whole. And so I decided that I would pick some of my small ones, because once you put the larger cucumbers into the jar, and these are 1 liter size, there's not a lot of room to put another large pickle on the top. So I wanted to have a mix of some larger ones at the bottom and some smaller ones at the top. And all I could find at the farmer's market yesterday was this size. So that's what I decided to do. So these have been washed and scrubbed. And then the next thing you want to do is you want to remove the ends off both sides of your cucumber. And the reason being is that there's enzymes in the ends of the cucumber, and if you slice that off, it's going to mean that your cucumber is going to stay crisper longer. And so that's been my experience. I've tried making pickles all kinds of ways over the years, and I find that the best crispness for my pickles were when I sliced off both ends. Now, you can prick the pickles as well, especially when they're that large, and so you can prick along the cucumber, and so then the brine will get into the cucumber if you prick along the cucumber. But I generally don't do that. I just slice off the ends, and usually I'm only pickling cucumbers that are about this size, or just maybe 1 inch longer. So I'll be pickling these 2 sizes. That's the size that I try to get. So wash, scrub, and then slice the ends off your cucumbers, and then you're ready to get to filling your jars once your jars are sterilized. So I take my jars, and I always use 1 liter jars, and I put them in my oven at 225 for 10 minutes to sterilize the jars. So I put the rings and the jars in the oven, and I see that my oven's preheated, so I'm ready to do that and move on to the next step. Okay, so I have my jars are sterilized, and now I'm going to pack them with my dill heads, my garlic, my cucumbers, and my grape leaves. So what I like to do is I put my grape leaves at the bottom, and so I put 2 in each jar, and I'm going to start, I think that I have enough to do 4 jars, so I'll just start with 4 and see where it goes. And actually the pot that I have on the stove, I like to only put 4 jars in that pot at a time, so I'm just going to do 4 just to get started. So pack those in. And these jars are really hot because I just took them out of the oven. And you want to do this relatively quickly after you've sterilized your jars. Now I have my brine already on the stove, and I just need to bring that to a boil. And it is not close yet because I just turned it on. And so that has the 1/2 cup of kosher salt, 3 cups of vinegar, and it has to be vinegar that's at least 5%, and 10 cups of water. So once that's come to a boil, I can shut that off. And I also have my canning pot on because you want that to be at a full rolling boil when you put the pickles in. So you know it can take 20 to 30 minutes to warm up your water in your canning pot. So start that while you're doing this. So now I'm going to put in each of these jars 2 dill heads, and if they're large dill heads, you can cut them in half. So typically I use a dill head about that size for each, so I'll do 2. So if you have really large dill heads, then feel free to cut them in half. And I like to break off if I have a long stem. I don't like to leave too much of the stem on the dill head because it just gets in the way of me filling the jars with the cucumbers. So I kind of keep the stem to, you know, 1 inch. This one's okay because the dill head's not very big, so I leave it, you know, no more than, you know, 1 inch. This is about 1.5 inches, so take a little bit of that off. So now all parts of that dill head will infuse a bit of dill into your jar, and I like to pick my dill heads when the seeds have started to form on the dill head, and if they're really small, then I'll put a couple in. So that's when I use them. Now sometimes I'm in a rush and I want to get my cucumbers done, and the dill heads don't have the seeds completely formed, and I use them anyways. So, but ideally I want to have a little bit of seed on that dill head. So now this is garlic I grew in my garden, and I harvested on about July 10th, and then I let it dry, and it's August 2nd today, and so it's cured a bit, and so it's going to have a really nice flavor. So that's a big garlic head, but I put 2 in each jar, and so we'll do that, and then we're ready to fill the cucumbers. So I'll start with large ones on the bottom, and I just kind of tilt the jar to one side, and I try to pick them around the same height if I can for the bottom, because then it's just going to fill nicely. This one's got some pretty large, it's going to have some pretty large cucumbers on it. And once you get to the point where it's pretty full, if you want, you can take one and slice it. And that way you can fit some more in there, some more slices, because you really want this to be packed tightly, because you want to only use the brine to fill the jar. You don't want the jar to be mostly brine. You want the jar to be mostly cucumbers. And so I will try to slice another one, and I can see I can get another one in there. I might be able to get another one to the side here. That's a little tight. No. So that's pretty tight. So now what I'll do is I'll take a longer, small one, and I'll try to see if I can fit one down the side. And I should move this so that you can see. I'll slide that down the side like that. And again, it's getting nice and packed tightly. And there's a little bit of room on that side, so I'll slide that one down there, and I'll see if I can get maybe even one more. Yep, still can fit one more in there. I'll take a look at the jar. Looks pretty tight, with the exception of a little bit of air at the bottom because of putting the garlic and the dill at the bottom. So now what you do is you want to fill the top part. And again, you still want to make that tight, so I kind of squish a cucumber to each side. Now if you have a whole bunch of small ones, it's kind of easier to fill the jars, I find. But this is what I have, so this is what I'm going to do. So then I fill it, you want to fill it so that there's an inch space of cucumbers. So on a liter jar, that's just when the jar starts to get to the top of, it changes to the narrow part. And so once I get enough packed in to that point, then it's ready for the brine. So maybe squeeze one more in there. So if you have an inch, that's what you want. It's a little tight, so I'll take that out and put it this way instead. And I might be able to fit one more on this side. Nope, that's good. Okay, so I have this jar is packed really nice and tight, so then I'm going to move on and I'm going to just fill all the rest of these jars, and then we'll put the brine in. Okay, so now my cucumbers are packed in tightly, and you want to pack them in so that there's, at least, there could be 3/4 inch. Actually, 3/4 inch is the right height. I had said an inch earlier, but it's pack them into a 3/4 inch. And you might have a couple cucumbers that are up a little bit, close, a little bit, just a slight bit over that 3/4 inch. It's okay if it's just one, but you just don't want to pack. You want to at least have the brine covering the cucumbers. So that's why you pack them to 3/4 inch. And you want to pack them tightly. In my experience, if you don't pack your pickles, your cucumbers in tightly, that's when I have had failed sealing on my jars. So make sure you pack them in tightly. So these are packed in tight, and I got it to 3/4 inch. It kind of is varied between an inch and 3/4 inch in some of them because of the shapes of the pickles, but I think that's going to be fine. I have my hot boiling water in my measuring cup. This is an 8 cup measuring cup, and it's just so I can sterilize my funnel and my utensils that I'm going to use. So, and my brine is boiling hot, and so the salt is dissolved and it's ready to go. So what I like to do is I just pour in up to, because the jar will have cooled. By the time you fill these, you're not going to keep it super hot. So I like to fill it about halfway, or what it looks like halfway, and then I move on to the next one, and I just kind of let that jar, the bottom of the jar, warm up, and then I move on to the next one. And when I say at the bottom of the jar warm up, it's important not to put cold jars in your hot pot, because that's likely to cause the bottoms of the jar to crack upon putting your jar into the water. So that's happened to me before too. So you want to make sure that this brine is boiling hot when you're filling your jars. And so I go around and I just fill them so that they're about halfway first. So I'm just kind of warming that jar back up to hot. And now I'm going to go back to the first jar. And so then I fill it. You might have a little bit of brine left over. You certainly should have enough brine to do 4 jars of pickles. And if you don't, then I would suspect that you have not packed your jars tightly enough. So then I take a plastic utensil. You can use a chopstick or a knife. A plastic utensil is good because it bends as you insert it. And so you want to insert it along the edges and just get the air out and press in. and that way the brine will get down to the bottom of the pan. I pack these super tight, so and that's good. That's what you want, but you can see how I'm just kind of pressing the pickles together, and that just gets the air out of the in between the pickles. And so, you know, you can look along the jar and you can see where there's air pockets, and you can kind of just use that as your guide to where you need to press. And so yeah, you want to remove as much air as you can without wrecking your pickles. And what I mean by that is if you use a knife, I find that then you kind of slice into the pickle as you're doing it. So I like to use a plastic utensil like this, or chopsticks. Chopsticks work really nicely. So I've done that, and then I can bring this one up to, then you're going to bring the brine up to a half an inch, give it a half an inch of headspace, so that's a half an inch from the top of the jar. And that's why I have my glasses on, so I can see what that looks like. It's closed. And this is important because you want to get this right, because it will, if you are less than that or more than that, that could cause your jar not to seal. And I like the way that this one's turned out because I see that the pickles are submerged completely in the brine. So I'm going to take some time to just fill the rest of the jars, and then we'll move on to putting the lids on. Okay, so my cucumbers are packed tightly. They're covered with the brine, and I've left a half an inch of headspace. Now, when you run your utensil around the inside to just remove the air bubbles, you might find that the pickles will move, or the cucumbers will move over, and there'll be room to put another, either a whole pickle or a slice of pickle. And so if you can get another pickle in there, then my advice is just cram it in, because you want this to be packed tight. And even if it means that your brine spills over, you have to take a little bit of brine out. It's worth doing. Again, you want to pack your cucumbers in there tight. So now I'll take a paper towel or a nice clean dishcloth, and I'll wipe the edges of the rims, just to get all the vinegar that might have spilled off on the edges. And then I'm going to add my snap lids to my boiling hot water. And you're only doing this to soften the seal, and so you only need to leave that in there for a couple seconds. You don't want to leave it in there for 5 or 10 minutes, because it could break down the seal. And so just 30 seconds to a minute is enough, and then you just use your magnetic wand to grab them out of the hot water, and then just touch down in the center, so you're not contaminating the edges of the snap lids. And then I'm going to put my rings on, which have been sterilized in a hot oven, 225, along with the jars. You can also put the rings in the boiling hot water. I just throw them in my oven at the same time. And then you're going to do this to fingertip tightness too. Now, you don't want to over tighten, because if you over tighten, when you go to put your pickles in your boiling hot water, the pressure might become too much, and your jar is going to break open. So again, only to fingertip tightness that you're going to tighten your rings, and you don't want to use any ring that has a dent in it, because that could prevent your seal. So I always inspect my rings and before I put them on, and make sure that I don't have that. So get that a little fingertip tight. Again, not too tight, because you need to be able, the boiling water canner is, the point of it is to force the air out of the jar, and so that there is no chance of the jar spoiling. So we're going to move over to the stove, and we're going to put those jars in the boiling water canner, which I have boiling already. You can see the steam coming out, and it's already at a rolling boil. And that's what you want to do. You want to put your pickles, or your cucumbers, which are going to be pickles, into your boiling water when it's just at a full rolling boil. Okay, so I've already put 3 jars in, and I've left an inch between each of the jars, and also an inch from the sides. And then I'm just putting the last one in, and you want to make sure that you have an inch of water above the jars. And so I have an inch above the jars, and an inch in between all of the jars. And you can see in this pot how the water level is really high, and you know, you have to have that inch of water above the jars. And so I'm just going to just make sure, and I think I can actually add in a little bit, and I actually have scooped out some hot water, and so this is going to bring this really close, but I want to make sure that I have that inch. And so, because this is going to boil for 15 minutes. Okay, so now I'm going to add my lid, and I'm going to wait until that comes back to a full rolling boil, and then we're going to process it for 15 minutes. Okay, so it's ready. I'm ready to start my timer, and I can see, I'll just lift the lid quickly. It's started to boil. And this is a special canning pot, which it actually has an indicator on the top where it tells me when the steam is the right temperature for when the pot is at the right boiling point. And so I know, because I'm using this pot, that I'm good to go. And so I set my timer now for 15 minutes. Now if you don't have one of these types of pots, that's fine. You can use a regular canning pot. You just have to make sure you have one that has the right volume. If you're going to do quart size pickles, you want to make sure that you can have that 1 inch above. And this was my experience over the years, that I had to have several different pots for doing canning quickly. And so this is the pot that I like to use for pickles if I'm doing it inside. And we're going to go through a whole bunch of different types of pots in different videos, and I'm going to talk about them specifically and their uses. So we'll get into more detail about this pot in another video, specifically talking about pots on canning. So my timer is set for 15 minutes, and so I'm going to let that process for 15 minutes. And then this is important for pickles. You want to shut your canner off after that 15 minutes and let the let it rest for 15 minutes or for 5 minutes before you take the lid off. And we'll get into the details of that after this is finished processing. Okay, so I just wanted to show you what this pot looks like when it's at a full rolling boil. It's processed for 10 minutes already, and you can see that even though I filled this pot like with, you know, it was maybe an inch and a half from the top, it's still at a full rolling boil is not seeping out the sides of the pot. So I really like using this type of pot for canning pickles with when I'm using 1 liter size jars. Okay, so it processed for 15 minutes, then I shut off my burner and I set my timer for another 5 minutes, and so my timer just went off, and so now it's time to take the jars out. And so I'll just take the lid off, and then I'll use my jar lift to take the pickles out. Now don't grab the rings, you want to grab the jar, and so I'm grabbing the jar right below the ring like that. You want to lift straight up and put them on your, I like to use a heavy duty cutting board, wooden board. And make sure that you squeeze tight, because these are liter jars and full pickles, so they're large and a bit heavier than if you're doing jam. And don't worry about tipping the jar over to remove the water on the top. That will just evaporate. You don't need to tip the jar. Last one. Okay, now we'll move over to the counter and finish the video. Okay, so my jars of pickles are out of the pot, And now this has been processing for 15 minutes, so it will take a while before you hear the snap and before they seal. So mine haven't sealed yet, but I expect that in about probably 10 minutes I'll hear a pop, but it can take a little bit more time with pickles for you to hear that snap. And so now I did want to say that this recipe that I put on the website is for using 6 pounds of cucumbers, and the brine will make typically 5 to 6 quarts, and so I have my brine left over because I tend to like to do 4 at a time when I'm canning inside and using this pot. And so I'll save this brine and I'll bring it back up to a boil, and I'll use that to do 2 more quarts tomorrow once I get some more small cucumbers off of my own homegrown cucumber vines. And so don't throw out your brine if you're going to, oh, there goes one, if you're going to use it, if you're going to make more pickles, don't throw it out. And but use it up in the next couple of days and bring it to a full boil before you use it in your in other jars for more pickles. And so I think that's all I wanted to say, except for the fact that you want to leave these jars and don't disturb them for 24 hours, even after they seal. And then what I like to do is I take the rings off, and then once they've sealed, after 24 hours, I take the rings off, I wash down the jar, and then I store them without the rings on in a cupboard. There's another one in my basement, and it's nice and cool in my basement, and it's a dark place, so I have a cupboard where it's closed up, and that will that's the way you want to store your pickles. And these will store for a year and have a really nice flavor, and it's honestly my family's favorite dill pickle. And so I always make sure that I do at least 12 jars of this particular type of dill pickle, and I've done up to 30 of these pickles, and we've eaten them all in the year. And so we really like pickles here. So I hope you get a chance to try this recipe, and check out the full recipe on Cansanity.com. And please, if you like this video, like it on YouTube, and I'd love to hear from you. So put a comment on YouTube too if you have something to say about how you make your pickles. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Have a great day.